No Olympic Games has ever been just a sports tournament. Greece bustled forward to host the first modern Olympics in 1896 as a soft power endeavour, hoping that summoning memories of ancient Athens would shore up a nationhood wrested back from the Ottoman Empire 70 years previously and still somewhat tentative. For any host city and country, an Olympic Games is a milestone in its history. Sometimes Olympics are recalled as a particular high point or genuine golden era. Every Australian alive in 2000 recalls the women's 400 metres victory by the great Indigenous sprinter Cathy Freeman and her victory lap clutching together the Australian and Aboriginal flags. London's 2012 Games, especially the opening ceremony, is still sentimentally treasured by a cohort of Remain-voting Liberals as a prelapsarian idol when the UK was a more welcoming place. Sometimes Olympics cast a pall, as the memories of Berlin 1936 and Munich 1972 do over Germany. And very often Olympics are a crucible in which the great global dramas of the day are represented, despite the desperate insistence of Olympic authorities that the Games be apolitical. Paris is one of those cities in which everything has happened, including in 1900 and 1924 the Olympic Games. And in 2024 France is a country in which a lot is happening. President Emmanuel Macron, as he contemplates the consequences of his pre-Games snap election, may be welcoming the Olympic interlude as an opportunity to figure out who is going to govern the country after the flame is doused. What will the 2024 Games mean for France? What is the political legacy of previous Olympiads? And what is it like to come to the Games as your nation's only athlete? This is the Foreign Desk.
For some reason, like a crazy feeling of passion and energy and love and appreciation just takes over you. You know, you just become the ultimate patriot for your country, and it's something that just happens natural, and it's a great feeling to be waving and holding your country's flag.
And I was so happy and proud to be in the Olympic Games and to represent Afghan women and refugees around the world. The refugees need to have a representative because we see today there are a lot of refugees, more than 120 million refugees across the world, and they need a voice.
There's a quite stringent regulation that they've got for these athletes. But as you rightly suggest, there are many more conflicts in the world that have been ignored in this, and that was one of the IOC's lines, is that sport has to pursue a neutral line. Now, how you do this is very, very tricky, because where do you draw the line?
You're listening to The Foreign Desk. I'm Andrew Mueller, and we have been broadcasting from Paris throughout this week on Monocle Radio, including our recordings for this episode from our pop-up studio atop the Sceaux Hotel. Our first guest was Daphnée Denis, Editor-in-Chief of the Tracks programme on the European public service channel RTÉ. I began by asking Daphnée how she would gauge the level of public enthusiasm for the Games when it was announced that Paris was even bidding for the Olympics, never mind had actually won the bid.
Minus 100.
I mean, adjusting for the France factor, you are, of course, a fabulously discontented people. What was it particularly that people did not want about the Olympics?
I think it was the spend, really. They just thought, we need money for so many things. Do we really need to spend money on this farce? Sports is nice, but we're also not, this is not true. Parisians are not very sporty people. Other people in France are. So we were like, what's the point? Nobody goes on runs here. Why are we doing this?
Was there also a thing of thinking, and perhaps not just for France, but specifically for Paris, something along the lines of, why do we, of all cities, need to attract more attention to ourselves? It's not like we struggle for tourists.
I think we eye roll at tourists. However, we love the attention. We're fine with the attention. We love to hate the attention, such as Emily in Paris. What is this? What are you saying about Paris? This is not Paris, blah, blah, blah. But we love it. We kind of love it.
How weird has it been, though, having these games in the middle of what I think we can accurately characterise is a febrile political situation here in France, even by French standards?
Yeah, I mean, it's unprecedented and insane. It was strange. It was schizophrenic. It's demanded that the French change their mindset very fast in just a few days. And it feels like this summer has been 3 years. We had European elections and far-right party Rassemblement National arrived first in France, and it was taken as a disavowal of Emmanuel Macron's policies and government. And he surprised us all by deciding to dissolve the National Assembly and ask us to vote in legislative elections, which we didn't expect. It was all extremely hasty. It had to happen before the Olympics in the summer, where people were like planning to leave. And, you know, suddenly we sort of imagine having a far-right government and a far-right minister welcoming international athletes to the Olympics, which was a little bit scary. Because at that point, we sort of thought they might get an absolute majority and they then will have to swear in a prime minister from the far right, Jordan Bardella, who I think for a large part of France doesn't represent values that at least we want to showcase to the world.
There is a theory doing the rounds in French media that one of the ideas behind Macron calling this snap election was that he was thinking, well, the Olympics are coming up, that will buy me an amount of time to deal with whatever the fallout is. But does that strike you as plausible? Is this what Macron wanted to spend the Olympic period doing? Because he is not generally somebody who lacks an appreciation of either France's grandeur or that of the role he occupies.
I'm not convinced by that argument. I think that's what he's doing now, certainly. But honestly, like if any party had had an absolute majority, something would have had to happen then. What happened, though, is that no party got an absolute majority. The left created a coalition, which came in first, but doesn't have an absolute majority. So they have to create a sort of coalition with either Macron's party or right-wing parties or with someone else. I don't know. They have to figure it out. It's kind of a Borgen episode, except French politicians don't really seem to understand the rules of Borgen or the rules of parliamentary democracies around the world. And so they don't want to compromise. They're like, no, we won. And, you know, the others are like, no, you didn't win because it's not an absolute majority. And it's chaos, basically.
The focus on the host city and the host nation that comes with hosting the Olympics it's kind of a double-edged thing. On the one hand, everybody pays lots of attention to you. On the other hand, everybody pays lots of attention to you. And people all of a sudden find themselves learning things about the host nation, which they may not always admire. And in the last few days, the ban on French athletes wearing the hijab, it's been causing an amount of head-scratching globally, I think.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation because it's not in all sports and it's a case-by-case basis. But yes, France has a very, I think, French take on secularism and specifically on women wearing the veil. So, for instance, in schools, girls are not allowed to cover up, but they are allowed in universities. It's like a very strange kind of rule. Like, it's not true in all sort of places and in all public spaces, but there is a burqa ban in public spaces. There's people talking about the hijab. And so in sports, in Olympic sports, France has considered that a person wearing the hijab couldn't represent France. And that has led some athletes, a basketball athlete, a sprinter, to sort of question whether they were going to join the Olympics. One of them dropped out. One of them is competing with a hat. And I think I personally understand why that might be baffling to other nations that think of secularism as the idea that everyone is free to have a religion. But that's not how the French see it, or the French institutions see it. They consider that religion shouldn't be visible and that, yes, you're allowed to have a religion, but you shouldn't broadcast it to the world.
Well, finally then, and a bit beyond that thought, I mean, it's very, very early to tell, but do you perceive any sense that this event will be any kind of transformative thing in the life of modern France, if not specifically in how it copes with issues of secularism and multiculturalism, but any others?
Definitely not when it comes to secularism. This is a big, thorny issue, and I don't think it's going to change. And I'm not sure. I think the Olympics are welcome in the sense that they bring happiness to French people in a moment that's very difficult. But I'm not convinced that they're going to have this sort of long-lasting impact or create some real sense of unity. I suspect they won't.
Daphnée Denis, thank you. That was Daphnée Denis, Editor-in-Chief of Tracks. You're listening to The Foreign Desk. This is the Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Mueller. For smaller countries, an Olympic Games is a rare opportunity to present themselves to a global audience. Outside the Olympic Village in Paris, I spoke to Shaun Gill. He is competing in the men's 100 metres and is the entirety of Belize's Olympic team. Belize is one of 4 countries fielding a single athlete at these games. I began by asking Shaun what Belize's Olympic selection process is like.
Well, so in our case, we don't necessarily have a qualifying athlete, meaning an athlete that meets exactly the performance standards set by IOC and World Athletics. So because of inclusion, they give every single country a spot. It's called a universality spot, so that every country can be represented at the Olympics. So from that point now, the federation, meaning the Belize Athletics Association, they choose the best athlete at the time. So at this moment, at the point of the selection, it was me, but it could have been anybody else. It's just based on performance. So at the time, I was the best Belizean athlete.
And how big a thing does it become in Belize when you are the entirety of their Olympic team? Is there a lot of fuss made of you in the media?
Yeah, it's actually a big deal. I mean, because, you know, it's only really one person to support. It's only me. So the entire country, I mean, you know, there's Belizeans across the globe. So everybody's supporting me from everywhere in the world. So it is a big fanfare.
And does it become a thing, like, do you hear from the Belizean government, do you hear from people in charge wanting to remind you that not only are you representing Belize abroad, you're the only person representing Belize abroad, it's a country that maybe people don't know much about? Are you under a lot of pressure to behave yourself?
Yeah, so that's actually been the reoccurring theme. You know, I've heard from high-ranking officials and even from family and friends, you know, and it is some pressure, and there is the reminder every single day, you know, you're representing your country, you know, don't get into any trouble, you know, you got to keep your diplomatic status.
Twice now you've also carried Belize's flag into the arena at the Olympics. Well, in this case, not into the arena, but onto the river. Is it possible to articulate what that feels like? I imagine it's a pretty special moment for any athlete, but I guess all the more special when there's only one athlete.
Yeah, so it is the second time. It's a special feeling, but let me see if I can describe it, because when we're walking up in Tokyo, so in France it's the boat, but when we're walking up to the point where they address you as the flag bearer, they start giving you your special garments and your flag pole holder. It's like the feeling is slowly coming in, because nothing started yet. But once we get into the point, it's literally marked off, and once you get to the point of where the volunteers is like, okay, now Belize, it's your turn. For some reason, like a crazy feeling of passion and energy and love and appreciation just takes over you. You know, you just become the ultimate, like, you know, patriot for your country, and it's something that just happens natural, and it's a great feeling to be waving and holding your country's flag.
Afterwards, do you even dare look at social media?
I do. I really do. But guess what? It's so much. It's so much. Like I can't read all the messages. I can't see all the comments. Even videos like going around of people sharing it. Like I can't track how many times I've seen it. You know, it's crazy. It's crazy. But I love the support.
This is where I will allow you to show off a bit. But what is your actual best time for the 100 meters?
Yeah, so my actual best time for the 100 meters is 10.56 seconds. It's not the Belizean national record, but it is good enough. I guess you'd say it's about average.
Well, that does prompt the follow-up question, which I'm going to ask on behalf of everybody who'd be doing well to run 100 metres in any time, never mind 10.5 seconds. You did a very good job of explaining what it feels like to carry your national flag into the Olympics. Is there a way you can explain what it actually feels like to be able to run 100 metres in 10.5?
You know, actually, I really do take pride in being an athlete, you know, a dedicated athlete. To get to this point of running, you know, the 100 meters in 10.5 seconds or even faster for whoever is running faster, it takes a lot of work, you know. It really does take a lot of work. I'm saying years of hard work. So when you start seeing your achievements starting to show up, you know, it's a really good feeling. You know, you take pride in it, and it's your craft. And if you really love what you do, then when you see the results, you could say, okay, I'm happy. At least all the work I've put in, it's showing for something, you know. But it is a good feeling. And I know that everyone looks at us, and this is we also have responsibility, because I know everyone looks at us as athletes and like, man, I don't think I could ever run that fast, you know. And we're over here as athletes thinking, man, how can I run faster? You know. So I do understand it's a responsibility, because they look at us as if we're somehow, I guess, godly or some aura, because we're doing something they could not possibly think of, you know.
Well, just finally then, I will ask you to represent Belize one more time. For listeners who may not have been there but are now curious about it, what would you say is the best reason to visit?
So I would say the best reason to visit Belize definitely is the culture. As soon as you get there, you're going to be immersed in the culture. Great food. You can go to the islands. We have some of the best beaches in the world. Most people that I've spoken with out here in the village that's been to Belize, everybody's been to the islands. So it seems the islands is the reoccurring theme and some people get there, most people get there by plane, but a lot of people also go on the cruise ships, and somehow everybody ends up at the islands. So I guess the islands is the magic spot.
That was Shaun Gill, Olympic sprinter from Belize. This is the Foreign Desk. You're listening to the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. One team at the Paris Games comprises several nationalities. It's the Refugee Olympic Team. This was first fielded at the 2016 Games in Rio de Janeiro, and in Paris fields 37 athletes who have had to leave 11 countries. We'll hear first of all from Paula Barakina, spokesperson for UNHCR France, who explained how the athletes for the Olympic Refugee Team are chosen.
The National Olympic Committee scout out for possible refugee athletes, and then they recommend them to the International Olympic Committee, and they're the ones who make the final decision in choosing the members of the team. Actually, it's not only the 37 members. Many refugee athletes get scholarships throughout 4 years to be able to train, but also to develop their career as an athlete, and then they are selected or qualify for the Olympics after those 4 years.
That was Paula Barakina of the UNHCR. And now let's hear from one refugee athlete. Masomah Ali Zada is a cyclist originally from Afghanistan. She competed for the Refugee Olympic Team at the Tokyo Games in the women's individual time trial, and she's now the chef de mission for the Refugee Olympic Team Paris 2024. She began by explaining how she got into cycling in the first place.
I learned cycling in Iran, but when I returned to Afghanistan, I never seen a girl on the bike. So because of that, I thought it's not any federation or any cycling team for Afghan women. But in 2011, I was in the team, a sport team in a school. One day, a president of a federation came to our school and searched for girls who would like to do cycling and participate in a competition to find girls to create a team. And it was like that I found there's a federation for cycling, there is a team. And when I participated in this competition, and since that, I gave up other sports, and I wanted seriously do cycling and be an athlete, professional athlete. But when I started cycling, I saw a huge difference between cycling and other sports that we did in the gymnasium in a closed area. In cycling, we put sportive clothes. And for most of the people of Afghanistan, it was the first time in their life to see a girl on the bike with sportive clothes. So it was really strange for them. Some of them, they for the first time when they saw us, it was shocked, but then they accepted. But some people think, no, it's opposite of our culture, opposite of our habitat. But they thought it's their responsibility to stop us in the different ways. So it was really dangerous for women of Afghanistan to do cycling. And my objective, it was to normalize cycling for women of Afghanistan, and that women could do cycling without fear. And at the same time, I had a dream to participate in the Olympic Games.
Well, a dream you realised in Tokyo. And you competed there as part of the refugee team, not for Afghanistan. But was it important for you to think that Afghanistan was being represented in the world by women?
Yeah, for sure, because my participation in the Olympic Games, I represent two terms, women of Afghanistan and all refugees. And I was so happy and proud to be in the Olympic Games and to represent Afghan women and refugees around the world. So for me, it was really important. I said, it's not important which country I represent. The important is what I represent. I represent Afghan women, and they were so proud of me that I talk about them. And also at the same time, the refugees need to have a representative, because we see today there are a lot of refugees, more than 120 million refugees across the world, and they need a voice, they need a representative. So I was in the Olympic Games like a positive image or like an inspiration for them, and I was so much proud to represent both of them.
There are a few Afghans among the refugee team at the Paris Olympics, including your fellow cyclist Amir Ansari and Manija Talash in the breakdancing. Do you know at all if people in Afghanistan will be able to follow their progress in any way?
For sure. In the social media, I saw already that the people of Afghanistan, especially women, they are proud of these athletes, especially women who will participate even for the Refugee Olympic team or even for Afghanistan team. They are proud and happy that there will be women or men of Afghanistan represent. They will participate in the Olympic Games and they will represent Afghanistan, all refugees. So for sure that they are behind of them, they support them, and they're proud of them.
You are here as chef de mission of the team, not as a competitor, which I'm sure is a very different experience, but do you miss competing? Do you kind of wish you were racing at these games?
To be honest, I really didn't miss to compete because I'm so much busy with the chef de mission, and also I'm so happy that I could go and see the competition of our athletes to support them. So it allowed me to see different competition at the same time, and also it allowed me to support our athletes. The level of competition is really high, so to be chef de mission and athlete is difficult to manage both of them. So I'm happy that I'm chef de mission and I could manage my responsibility as well as I could.
I just have one question further that I'm personally curious about, and it was about being a cyclist in Afghanistan. It's a long time since I was last in Afghanistan, but I do remember the roads being really bad. How difficult did that make life as trying to come up as a road cyclist?
Yeah, it's the same thing for me also. When I were in Afghanistan, I remember the road was not good for cycling, and at the same time there was a lot of pollution. The cars, even in the winter, there are a lot of pollution. And I remember every time when I finished cycling, our face was full of pollution. We even couldn't recognize ourselves, and we laughed for some minutes. That's what happened to our face. And just when put our glass, it was clean, and the other side was full of smoke and pollution. Yeah.
Masomah Ali Zada of Afghanistan and the Olympic Refugee Team. Thanks for joining us. This is The Foreign Desk. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Mueller. Delusions of the Olympics as an apolitical sanctuary are always vanquished as soon as the team from Taiwan enters the arena, competing in deference to the sensitivities of China as Chinese Taipei. Monocle's Chris Chermak spoke with Garret Clarke, director of a documentary called What's in a Name, about how the Taiwanese feel about their Olympians and the fact that their own flag cannot fly above an Olympic podium.
My name is Garret Clarke. I am from California, but I own a production company in Taipei. It's called Bay City Productions. I moved to Taiwan 19 years ago. I got a scholarship to study an MBA at a university in southern Taiwan, and slowly from that built a career in photography and in video, and then to a full-on production company. I had a meeting with one of the producers from Taiwan Plus, and we were just kind of kicking around different ideas about something that would be fun to shoot about Taiwan, but also something that could be interesting and impactful. We were joking around. He's like, "What do you think about Chinese Taipei?" And I was like, "Oh, I hate it." And we were kind of talking about that feeling that you get. And from that, it was like, you know what, we should make something to try to kind of explain and understand that feeling. And that's how it started.
Action. Okay. What do you think about the name Chinese Taipei? Maybe a little disappointed. Yeah.
Obviously, a small island, when there's gold medal winning Olympians, it's a huge deal. And that's a big sense of like Taiwanese pride. And I think they see it as Chinese Taipei is just another way to represent Taiwan and to get people to know about it. And so for the average Taiwanese person, they completely understand like how the Olympics can be a vehicle for identification. And they're happy to just be like, look, we're here, we're going to compete and we're going to win. And society as a whole really rallies behind all the Taiwanese athletes as well. Taiwanese people and Taiwan society are like incredibly practical people. And so they're like, if you really were to push them, I think the response would be like, what's better, to like really push to change our name or to win a gold medal? And they would say in the long run, probably winning gold medals and doing well, that's our strategy. And eventually that will get us to a place to get recognition.
Representing Chinese Taipei, Chu Mu Ye.
下台了，然后就觉得很兴奋。那等一下如果要受访要说什么
Especially for us putting together the documentary, to be able to get somebody as high profile as him to speak was like a big win for the documentary, because most of the current athletes that we had spoken to were not there, didn't want to get involved in a conversation about this just because it's too sensitive. And so for him being the first gold medalist, and now that he's a little bit older, I don't think he has to worry too much about causing controversy. He was willing to be involved with the documentary. And also I think that he was a really great representation of the players' feelings. And to hear him talk about, what it was like for him to win and being really proud and being Taiwanese. And the first thing that he wanted to say when he won was to tell the world that he was Taiwanese, but also completely understanding, like he was able to break down the IOC rules very clearly and simply to be like, this is why changing the name is a challenge. And this is why I think it's too risky. And he had one final moment where he said, if you change the name and we get kicked out of the Olympics, then the name has lost its value.
Man, when we won the champion title, the whole street was like, yeah, right? I mean, this is how we want to express our love to our country, Taiwan.
I definitely think that Taiwan's profile in the past 4 years has risen a lot. And so now when people see like all around the world, so many people have heard about Taiwan, heard about the semiconductor industry, have heard about this conflict with China. And then now they're going to see Chinese Taipei. It's one of these things where it's like, it will be very noticeable if you've been paying attention at all. And so definitely that probably makes China feel a little bit insecure. So they might have a heightened awareness of it. Definitely on the video that we posted, the like Chinese kind of internet troll army has gone all over the comments. One of the kind of enjoyable things to do is to go translate the comments from Chinese viewers, because they're so anti, the belief in China is that Taiwan is a province of China. And for a lot of these people, there's no disputing that whatsoever. And so they're coming from that perspective. And it's such a opposite perspective of reality.
When I was at the WBC, I heard the chanting, Team Taiwan, Team Taiwan. I felt like so great. I feel the Taiwanese are really loving the country, loving the team.
I had a really interesting moment as a filmmaker the other night. I got a message in the middle of the night and I woke up and looked, and it was because the vice president of Taiwan had tweeted out about the documentary. And as a filmmaker, video maker, that's a crazy high honor type of thing where you're like, whoa, I can't believe it's made an impact at that level, that it's reached the vice president of the country. And so I think in that sense, certainly that must have made some kind of impact. And then just today, somebody sent me a Taiwanese kind of influencer vlogger guy that is going around asking people what they think about the name Chinese Taipei. And at the beginning of his video, he's like, this is inspired by this documentary. And now I'm going to go and kind of continue asking people this question. So I guess, I don't know, it seems like it's made some level of impact.
That was the Taiwan-based documentary filmmaker Garret Clarke speaking to Chris Chermak. This is The Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Mueller. While we cannot know quite yet what wider geopolitical resonances the Paris Games may have, we can be sure that they will be remembered for something other than people running, jumping or throwing. Olympics always are. Finally, on today's show, we're joined by Philip Barker, journalist, historian and editor of the Journal of Olympic History. We began by discussing Moscow in 1980, when everyone, of course, remembers the boycott attached to the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. But had that idea been looming in the Olympic consciousness from Montreal 76, when 29 mostly African countries did not participate because they were cross with New Zealand for hosting South Africa's Springboks?
Yes, there was certain in the 70s a sort of climate of boycotts, and the Olympic Games themselves were not an attractive proposition. When they were looking at choosing a host city for 1984, Tehran came in to start with, and then they withdrew, and the only candidate was Los Angeles. And this was something that had happened, and the Olympics currency, because of the Montreal boycott, it was a movement in crisis. And this was exacerbated by what happened in Moscow, where the tanks came in just 6 or 7 months before the Games were about to begin, this great coming out show for Leonid Brezhnev's Soviet Union. And Jimmy Carter then decided that the Americans should not go. He called for the Games to be postponed or cancelled. And from then on, it took on a life of its own with other governments, the British government, Margaret Thatcher, the Australian government with Malcolm Fraser, calling for boycotts. And you had the government calling for the boycott, the sports authorities insisting that sport had nothing to do with politics and trying to force through that the teams still had a right to take part in the Games.
Sports authorities always insist that sport has nothing to do with politics, and they are, of course, always wrong, as they demonstrated in Moscow in 1980 when you had some of the teams that did turn up trying to make some sort of a point by not waving their own flags.
Well, that's right. Australia were one of them. There was a Treaty of Rome almost, because they had a meeting in Rome a few months before, and some 18 European national Olympic committees decided that they would fly the Olympic flag. The rules were allowed to change so that if you see the placard, for example, for Great Britain, it doesn't say Great Britain, but BOA, British Olympic Association, and the other countries the same. And the Soviets were playing politics too, because in the television coverage, if you watch, every time there's a national flag, they pan out and you see everything. And as soon as there's somebody carrying an Olympic flag, you never see that because the cameraman zooms in on the face of the flag bearer. So they were playing their politics as well. They couldn't understand why. And the rationale given by some officials was, one, it was a tacit way of saying that we weren't happy, we were here because of the sport, but we wanted to do something that made it not quite normal to show that we were unhappy with what had happened in Afghanistan. And two, there have been calls at various times to do away with national anthems and national flags and nationalism. So it was a way of trying to denationalise the Olympic Games.
But to bounce out of Moscow seamlessly into the next one we wanted to discuss, which is Los Angeles 1984, historically, retrospectively, do we think the boycott of the Moscow Games, did it hasten the end of the Cold War by a single minute, or did it just ruin the 84 Games in advance?
I think it just ruined the 1984 Games in advance. The current International Olympic Committee president, Thomas Bach, had won a gold medal in 1976 in fencing, as is always announced at every single Olympic event that he attends, and he was down to compete again in 1980, and so was the organiser of the Tokyo Olympics, one of the leading officials there, Yasuhiro Yamashita, who was a judo player. And both of them missed out because their countries, Germany and Japan, both boycotted in 1980. And then in 1984, there was some pretext that the Soviet bloc were unhappy with security. Now, if you believe that, you believe that pigs fly across Paris every night and there were fairies at the end of the garden. It was clearly a tit-for-tat boycott. There were one or two that went against it. Romania, for example, took part, and Ceausescu, Nicolae Ceausescu, that beacon of human rights, received the Olympic Order for supporting the team going to Los Angeles. The Chinese came, but Otherwise, the Soviet bloc stayed away.
But what we do get at the 84 Games, another extraordinary political subtext, is the IOC trying to accommodate both Chinas, because the People's Republic of China had turned up quite early on in the PRC experiment. I think 52 was their first Olympics, and then didn't come again until Los Angeles.
Well, there were lots of insults thrown both ways. Trivial as it may sound, a lot of it was about what you called them both, because in 1960 the Taiwanese marched under protest because they wanted to be known as Republic of China, and they'd been told to march as Formosa. And then throughout the 60s and 70s you get discussions going on. In 1976, Republic of China, Taiwan, were there in the village with their name, and they were the ones accepted by the IOC at that time, and they eventually had to leave the village because there were political pressures being put on by the Canadian government, Trudeau's government, because they'd done some kind of trade deal with the communist China. So in the end, you have Taiwan not taking part, and the IOC eventually deciding we've got to do something about this. So what did they do? They set up a commission, and this went to both Communist China and the Republic of China, which is Taiwan, and thrashed out a deal. And now Taiwan is known in Olympic circles as Chinese Taipei, and they have this special flag. It's not the national flag. It's, in normal times, it's the only country that competes under a flag other than its national flag.
We do want to move on finally to Barcelona 1992, which, in terms of the geopolitical subtexts, is an absolutely extraordinary Olympic Games, because we are seeing a representation at the Games of a world being reordered. We have South Africa welcomed back into the Olympic fold. We have a whole bunch of countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union now competing under their own steam. And we somehow have Yugoslavia, which is literally fracturing as the Games go on into a horrendous civil war, still being allowed to compete under its own flag.
And a united Germany for the first time
Indeed,
since, in real terms, first time since before the Second World War. That's another story. But Yugoslavia had been banned from the European Football Championships of 1992. But the IOC went to the United Nations and said, look, this is punishing the sportsmen. And that was their rationale. We don't want to punish the sportsmen for the misdeeds of the politicians. And even today, if there's misgovernance in the National Olympic Committee, they will allow the athletes to compete as individual athletes just so that they're not punished. But you had that whole panoply in 1992. They just sorted out, Mandela had been released. Each country is supposed to have a properly constituted National Olympic Committee. But what happened there was that rules were slightly waived just to make sure that people were included. I mean, South Africa marched under a completely different flag, the one they've ever marched before, ever since. They had this specially designed flag. You had the whole mission to the United Nations on regard of Yugoslavian countries. So some of them marched as individual athletes. Bosnia-Herzegovina was able to compete under its own flag. You had the former Soviet bloc. You had the Baltic republics as their own national teams, and then you had others as the unified teams. So Ukraine would be part of that. So they all competed together in this rather limbo status. But it was a way of getting people in. And they, of course, had that wonderful symbol in Barcelona, the giant flag that came across everybody. They had an idea of how do we show that the world is one during the Olympics. So they had this flag, and it was probably the largest flag that's ever been seen in the world that was actually possible to make. And they pulled it across, and the athletes enthusiastically accepted this. And it came over, there's a memorable image of the flag in the opening ceremony in Barcelona. And Juan Antonio Samaranch later said the symbolism of this, showing the world was together, it rather lost a bit of it when they cut up the flag and gave it away with a Spanish newspaper afterwards. But that was the idea.
There's a few themes there that bring us towards the here and now, not least the idea that a unified world is no more realistic a prospect now than it was in 1992. Has the IOC ever attempted to get its head properly around, or has it perhaps just willfully avoided, the question of what a consistent line is on when a country is beyond the pale? Because South Africa was exiled from a lot of sport for decades because of apartheid. Russia is not competing at these games because of its behaviour towards Ukraine, and yet There are, of course, any number of other countries here competing who you could quite reasonably say have a case to answer about appalling behaviour generally.
Well, you've got Palestine and Israel to start with, haven't you? But the situation for the current Games is that there are some athletes from Russia and Belarus taking part, and they've been given this special status and even a special flag, Athlète International Neutral. And what this means is that there were certain stipulations about their participants, about 35 of them, and the IOC themselves have set up a commission to make sure that these are validated. So it means that they're not allowed to have come out in any way in support of the war in Ukraine, and certainly not to have worn the Z on their vests, as we've seen some athletes, or attended any kind of victory rally with Putin or other events in Russia. Similarly, there were no teams, and they're also not allowed to have any affiliation to either the armed forces in either country or the security forces. So there's a quite stringent regulation that they've got for these athletes. But as you rightly suggest, there are many more conflicts in the world that have been ignored in this, and that was one of the IOC's lines, is that sport has to pursue a neutral line. Now, how you do this is very, very tricky, because where do you draw the line? It's a largely symbolic thing.
Philip Barker, editor of the Journal of Olympic History, thank you for joining us. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk, recorded in Paris. We'll be back next week, and look out for The Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Chris Chermak and Christy O'Grady. Christy also produces The Foreign Desk Explainer. Special thanks as well to our team in Paris, especially Carlotta Rebello, David Stevens and Steph Chungu for their assistance with this episode. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email chris@cc@monocle.com, and don't forget to subscribe to Monocle Magazine and our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Mueller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.